Now, the Book of Ruth, we're in chapter 4. This is the end of the Book of Ruth. So I'm wrapping this up, and there's not a whole lot going on at the end of, well, there's a decent amount happening at the end of the Book of Ruth, clearly, but we've hit the book pretty hard. So I'm just going to go over a couple of interesting things. First of all, we need to actually read the Book of Ruth, chapter 4. So it's story time. Are you ready, folks?
Yes, sir.
All right. So now, meanwhile, Boaz had gone up to the city gate and sat down there when the Redeemer of whom Boaz had previously spoken passed by. Such and such, he said. And it literally says like so-and-so in the Hebrew text. It's kind of funny. So-and-so, John Doe, he said, come over and sit down. And so he came over and sat down, and he took 10 of the city's leaders and said, sit down here, and they sat down. And then he said to the redeeming kinsman, the parcel of land which used to belong to our relative Elimelech is being offered for sale by Naomi, who has returned from the plain of Moab. I thought I should tell you about it and say, buy it in the presence of the people sitting here and in the presence of the leaders of my people. If you want to redeem it, redeem it. But if it is not to be redeemed, then tell me so that I can know, because there is no one else in the line to redeem it, and I'm after you. He said, I want to redeem it. Then Boaz said, the same day you buy the field from Naomi, you must also buy Ruth, the woman from Moab, the wife of the deceased, in order to raise up in the name of the deceased an heir for his property. The Redeemer said, then I can't redeem it for myself, because I might put my own inheritance at risk. You, take my right of redemption on yourself, because I can't redeem it. In the past, this is what was done in Israel to validate all transactions involving redemption and exchange. A man took off his shoe and gave it to the other party. This was the form of attestation in Israel.
Can you get your shoe back?
Yes. So the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and took off his shoe. Boaz addressed the leaders of all the people. You are witnesses today that I am purchasing from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Kilion and Machlon. Also, I am acquiring as my wife Ruth, the woman from Moab, the wife of Machlon, in order to raise up in the name of the deceased an heir for his property, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his kinsman and from the gate of his place. You are witnesses today. And all the people at the gate and the leaders said, we are witnesses. May Yehovah make the woman who has come into your house like Rachel and Leah, who between them built up the house of Israel. Do worthy deeds in Ephrat. Become renowned in Bethlehem. May your house, because of the seed Yehovah will give you from this young woman, become like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Yehudah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He had sexual relations with her. Yehovah enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be Yehovah, who today has provided you a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. May he restore your life and provide for your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. And Naomi took the child and laid it on her breast and became its nurse. The women who were her neighbors came and gave it a name and said, a son has been born to Naomi, and they called it Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Here is the genealogy of Peretz. Peretz was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nachshon. Nachshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Oved. Oved was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. There is the genealogy of the kingly line of David. Now, just a couple of interesting things here. So they go to the city gates, and I don't know if you guys have really studied much or have much archaeological background on the city gates, but there's some interesting things to know about the gates of a city in ancient Hebraic thought. In ancient times in general, which a lot of people really don't know, and I thought I would cover it for just a moment. So The gate of the city the city only has generally one entrance, unless it's a fairly large city and can be defended easily. They usually only have one entrance. They put up a wall that's 6, 8, 10 feet thick, and they got one entrance. They only have to defend one access, one ingress point. That's just smart thinking. When you don't have a huge population or standing army to defend yourself, you put one gate in the city surrounded by a high wall, and you should be, fairly safe for a little while at least. So there's generally, providing for the greater defense, you have one gate. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, outside the city gate is on the left-hand side, and inside the city gate is on the right-hand side with these images. Outside is often a large open-air marketplace. In Greek, they call it an agora. And, vendors and setting up stalls, buy, sell, and trade goods outside the city gates. And then inside the city gates, and this is the city gate right here on the right-hand side, you can see. Now, what they would actually do in some of the more advanced places, they would have a sewer running into a little ditch that's carved right through the center of the street, and then they cover it over with wood and some pavers and stuff, and if they need to pull it up and do plumbing, they can do that. But the filth will run right out the city gates and right down into a nearby valley. In Jerusalem, for example, what is the name of that valley where all that stuff runs to? The valley of the Kidron, or the Hinnom Valley, which is literally where we get our word hell. A burning, stinking pit of filth.
Because that's where they send their trash.
That's right. So,
and it was usually burning all the time.
It was on fire, yeah. It's burning trash is a great way to dispose of it.
Why was it on fire?
You dispose of it that way. They didn't have landfills in those days. They didn't dig big pits and throw their garbage in there and then cover it over so it would decompose. They just burn it. It's much easier. So outside the city gates, you got the marketplace, and then inside the city gates, you generally will see, and this is even the case in part of the temple in Jerusalem had the same kind of layout, where you come right through the gates, and on either side are 6 large rooms, where you can see right here, somebody has drawn like a cartoon 3D image over this side to kind of show you how it works. But you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rooms on the inside of the city gate. These are various chamber rooms where the king will meet with other nobles from around, the city elders. All kinds of important city government is meeting here. That's why whenever you see somebody in the Bible meeting at the gates of the city, that's what they're talking about. It's not just that they're hanging around outside waiting to meet somebody. Right inside the city gates is the city center. That's where stuff is happening inside the city. Government functions, important meetings, that kind of stuff. What's court? Absolutely. Court hearings, that's where the king will sit to hear the pleas of his people. So that's where all the important stuff happens in the city. You'll have a town center where like festivities can happen and stuff, but those will generally happen outside. And in this area here is just strictly government functions and meetings and city councilmen and stuff like that. Like when you see Lot going and sitting at the city gate of Sodom, that is more than likely that he was a council member or a man of some high position in the city of Sodom. It's also, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Boaz is, although he seems to have been a wealthy and prominent citizen in Bethlehem. The text tells us that right up front, that it is likely that he was a city councilman or something like that. Yeah?
The Legends of the Jews says that he was the president of the Sanhedrin. And
That's a good.
Very old man.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is some interesting things about what's happening inside the city gates. Now, also, this is these city gates will have a lot of powerful defenses, big, thick wooden doors and iron bars that come down, and these can be turned into defensive positions rather quickly. All these corners and angles and different layers. You can station troops inside these first 2 rooms to attack people from the side as they're trying to come through, and if they have to fall back to the second position, they can do that. It's hard to penetrate the city gates, and that's why in the time of King David, in some of these stories you get in Samuel, you'll see them trying to tunnel under the gates. It's much easier to go to a dark side of the city where nobody's paying attention and get tunnel under the wall and get in the city, because this is heavily defended. Just some interesting archaeological stuff. It's always fascinating
It's like
to me.
City Hall there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Boaz actually is going to the gates of the city here to conduct his business when so-and-so happens to walk by, and they're going to settle the business of Naomi and the inheritance of the land and this kinsman redeemer stuff. It's all going to happen right there in the city gates of Bethlehem. So now, a couple of key points. Boaz gathers 10 men. Now, I know that many of you have probably heard about a minion. Have you heard about a minion? Not M-I-N-I-O-N, like he's my minion, but a minyan, M-I-N-Y-A-N. You know about that? You heard about a minyan? That's in Jewish tradition, it is thought that you cannot conduct any real business with God for either worship or prayer or any kind of communal gathering of any significance cannot happen unless there are 10 adults. Now, in strict Judaism, it's 10 men. They'll take children over the age of 13 who have been bar mitzvahed and are sons of the commandments. They can count towards the 10. In Reform Judaism, some of the laxer, more liberal forms of Judaism, they'll include women in that 10 in order to conduct business with God, prayers or worship of some kind. That's in this passage is where some of that tradition comes from. But it's interesting that that makes me think of. This is where they also get the 70 men of the great assembly, the 70 men of the Sanhedrin. I think at one time they had 120 men of the great assembly at the time of that was with the time of Ezra and Nehemiah and the return of the Babylonian exiles. They had 120 people who had gathered together into leadership positions. So what's interesting to me, though, is this makes me think of where Yeshua says, where there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name. Are you familiar with that passage? In Matthew 18. I'm going to pull that up if you don't mind, because I'd love to read that to you. Because it's interesting that there may be a connection here, a tentative one, but I want to just bring it to your attention. Because in Matthew 18, verses 15 to 20, for example, if you have your Bible or your electronic Bible, you can take a look at it. Starting in verse 15, it says, "Now if your brother should be sinning, then go and expose him between you and him alone, and if ever he should be hearing you, then you gain your brother. Yet if he should not be hearing, then take still 1 or 2 others along with you, that at the mouth of 2 witnesses or of 3, every declaration may be made to stand. Now if ever he should be disobeying them, tell it to the ecclesia. Now, if ever he should be disobeying the ecclesia also, let him be to you even as the man of the nations, a Gentile, and the tribute collector. I am telling you the truth, whatever you should be binding on the earth shall be those things having been bound in the heavens, and whatsoever you should be loosing on the earth shall be loosed in the heaven. And verily I am saying to you that if ever 2 or more of you should be agreeing on the earth concerning any matter whatsoever, it is as they should be requesting shall be granting them from my Father who is in the heavens. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them." Now that is a passage which I'm sure you have just become aware, if you weren't already, is commonly seriously misunderstood or misused, misapplied. What is the common understanding of 2 or 3 people gathered in my name? Wayne? It's about prayer and saying, hey, if 2 or 3 people gather together and agree in the name of Jesus that something's going to happen, then it's going to happen. Is that the context of this passage? Not even close. What is the context of this passage? Did you miss it? You want me to read it again? Establishment of authority. It's saying if your brother sins against you and you call him out and he hears you, delightful. If he sins against you and you call him out and he doesn't hear you, then take a couple people with you and say, hey, you were in sin, brother. You're doing wrong. You need to get back on the path. And if he hears you, fantastic. If he doesn't, then you go to the church. You go to the ecclesia. And if he says, thumbs his nose at the church, then he will be ejected. Become a Gentile. Treat him like a tax collector and a sinner. Don't have anything to do with you.
Bite our thumbs at him.
We bite our thumb at him, as Shakespeare would say.
And that's really cool because I don't know if I just forgot or but the 2 or 3 witnesses connecting to 2 or 3 in my name because his name is called in the Word of God. He came in the character, authority of his father's name is upon him. And this is the word that we're supposed to be witnessing to.
Yeah. And it's right in the Torah. It's right in the Torah that you cannot have judgment of any kind without 2 or 3 witnesses.
The reason why he says 2 or 3 is because he wants you to go back to that passage, 2 or 3 witnesses.
Absolutely. Gracie?
It just makes me wonder if when a Christian or a Christian group works for another group who claim to be Christians, and then it's time to pay them, and they refuse the payment, or they lag on it, or whatever, and then they'll say, well, you really can't go to the law because the Lord doesn't want us to bring our things like that before the public for bad testimony.
Right.
Well, if they would just follow the steps,
Absolutely.
take care of it.
It's clear as day.
It might not get them the money, but it would take care of the problem.
And it provides for justice and righteousness. And with Torah, what does the Torah say about paying people?
Pay him before
It
dusk.
says pay them the same day.
Yeah, before dusk.
If a man works for you during the day, you pay him that evening because he relies on that money. Now, in our society, that's not always practical. But for goodness sake, man, you don't make somebody dally along for 2-3 weeks or a month before you pay your bill. That's terrible. Jerry and then Angela?
Well, I'm just going to say it's 2 words, Torah justice.
Yeah, it's Torah justice.
But also, I think it's in Corinthians where the guy was having sexual relations with somebody, I don't know who.
Yeah, yep.
And they went through the same process, and Paul said finally threw him out.
Get him
God
out.
will take care of him.
Turn him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Absolutely, so that his soul would be saved. Angela?
There's also an element of mercy in there because instead of taking him directly to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
we're
Yeah.
sitting him down privately.
Absolutely.
Sitting him down with just a couple people.
Yeah.
So, when you call someone out in front of, I was a teacher, a high school teacher, and I know what happens when you call some little rebellious out in front of his friends. What you get is
More rebellion.
ugly.
Absolutely.
That is the worst possible thing you can do. And so this is allowing that opportunity for him to assess himself without that defensiveness or that, you just embarrassed me thing.
Absolutely. That's a critical thing, man. It's merciful all the way through. You hope that your brother's going to hear you one-on-one. If he doesn't, then 1-on-3. Even then, if he doesn't, then we have to take it to the next level. Jimmy?
It goes back, I think, initially to when Noah was treated shamefully by his son.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
aired his foolishness.
Yep. Absolutely.
To every human being on the planet.
Absolutely. So, now, I want to... Go ahead. Yeah, Lou, go ahead.
Well, I'm just trying that maybe today, but it could also be a safety factor.
Yeah.
If I have a couple of guys with me, you're not going to argue with me as much.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great observation that, and that's obviously got to be presented carefully. If you're getting together with 2 or 3, it doesn't mean gang up on each other.
No.
It means I need to go to my 2 brothers and tell them what has happened in the situation from my perspective. Those 3 people now need to go to that individual and say, Brother so-and-so has informed us of his perspective on what has happened here. We'd love to give you an opportunity to talk with us about it. And then the 2 of them additionally are hopefully going to help make a righteous judgment. That's the call. It's not, I'm going to get you on my side and we're going to come against this guy and put our thumb on him. That's not the way it should work.
Yeah, I think that the whole in my name thing is really important too because it's not just like, hey, you agree with me, right?
Yeah.
It's Scriptures say, and you agree with this, that this is what the Scriptures
Absolutely,
say, so we're going to
yeah.
come forward and say, look, this is what the Scriptures say.
Yeah, and we have not in the church age for some time now been really very good with authority, especially in America. We eschew authority at every turn. We are a rebellious lot. The nation was founded on rebellion. So, we don't like authority. We don't like people telling us what to do, period. And so it's tough. It's tough to have authority in the church these days. Because if you don't like what the church says and they kick you out, where do you go? Right down the street. There's another one just down the road that has no idea about what your background is. And you just start over and go wreak havoc somewhere else. Hayden? Oh, okay. Thank you. So now, yes, June?
I always have comments. Just another one bites the dust.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's unfortunate that, it's nice that we can have, we have a large city here of, several million people, and you can't all just have one or two churches to accommodate the people who want to go to church, We've got to have more of them. However, unfortunately, it's become really common to where there's no real buy-in into the community, becoming a member of the community of the church. You know what I'm saying? Where you really get to know those people and be accountable to them, and you have formed that kind of a community, and you can just move around. There's no real authority. Now, why would I be bringing that up in this situation with the Book of Ruth? Do you see any connection here? I told you that these 10 people getting together to talk to Boaz and the Redeemer made me think of that. Why did I think of that? It says people gathering together. Is that the only connection that I have made here? Do you see anything about what's happening in this scene in the Book of Ruth that is related in some way to the Book of Matthew?
Well, Boaz knew he had to follow certain procedures.
Yes.
For him to be able to redeem her.
Yes. And I would say that it's possible, I'm just throwing this out there, that we know that this thing about the kinsman redeemer has been seriously mixed up a little bit in the Book of Ruth, because the Torah talks about a kinsman redeemer, but not to this extent. The Jews of this time had expanded the tradition to include a distant relative who is marrying into somebody. But we saw in the Book of Ruth a while ago where that seems to have gone even back to Abraham possibly, with Abraham marrying his brother's sister, his own niece, that Sarai might have been his niece from his deceased brother. And that it's not terribly outside the scope of things to say it's not just if a brother needs to marry his brother's widow. They had taken it beyond that. And it just occurred to me that perhaps, how long has Naomi been back in town and nothing has been done about this kinsman redeemer situation? That she's in serious trouble and she's back here with her daughter-in-law living among these people for how long? Well, I guesstimated through my interpretation of the text that at least a year had gone by. She's been engaged now in 2 barley harvests, in my opinion. So is it possible that what is happening in this scene is that a little bit of judgment is taking place? That Boaz is saying, hey, buddy, you're the nearer redeemer than I am. And this situation has been going on for at least a year. Why haven't you stepped up to redeem this woman? He might be calling him out a little bit and saying, hey, he did it gently. He presented it openly and said, hey, man, we got this situation with Boaz and Naomi here. Step up if you're going to step up. If you're not going to, move aside, because I intend to. Now, you can see what happens here. He's like, oh, hook me up. I'm ready to go. Called out in public, in a public assembly. Okay? This is why, and I learned something from reading this again this week. Never answer until you hear the full details. Because there's a Gentile woman named Ruth who comes along with the bargain. Because he's like, yeah, I want to redeem it. Well, you know that there's also this chick named Ruth that you have to take out. Oh yeah, sorry, I can't do that. So you listen to the whole thing and you have a clear... It might have been best for him to say, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. why don't you give me, I will be back to you within 48 hours, and I will make my decision, and we'll have another minion here with 10 people, and I'll let you know. Fill me in on all the details so I can seek counsel from wise people, and I can pray about it, and I promise I will get... Now, you can't say, I'll get back with you, and then go off and not ever come back, because a lot of people will do that too. You got to say, you be a person of righteousness and say, I need some time to consider this. Give me 48 hours. Give me 72 hours. And then I'll get back with you. But he spoke up a little too hastily and said, I'll redeem it. And then the rest of the details came out, and he said, I can't do that. So it's a proverb. It is absolutely a proverb that a fool is one who answers before he hears the full details.
But why would he have not known the rules and what was involved? I mean, it wasn't that... They were closer in families, I thought, back in those days.
You would certainly think so.
He would have known
right.
Naomi had a daughter-in-law.
It seems to me that if this is a tradition that is taken seriously, and it seems to be, that somebody should have done something right away. And that some amount of time has passed. Jimmy?
I don't see how it's Naomi's land, right?
No. I'm coming to that.
Okay.
I'm coming to that in just a
Ruth
second.
get involved in that?
That's a great question. I'm coming to that in a second. Just give me 1 sec. I'm coming right up to that. Any other comments, questions, or concerns about this 2 or 3? It was just something I wanted to throw out there. I thought it might be possible that they were calling this guy on the carpet and saying, hey, somebody should have taken care of this already. So, this mysterious other kinsman redeemer who balks when Ruth is actually included in the bargain. Now, this is quite interesting because it almost represents to me like a shadow picture of the priests and the elders and the scribes in the day of Yeshua being called out for not doing their duty as redeemers. And especially note that when it's brought to the attention of this redeemer that a Gentile woman is involved in the mix, he balks. It almost seems to me as though this might be a shadow picture of the priests and scribes and elders, the leaders in the days of Yeshua, who were not acting in a righteous manner, and that when the Gentiles became involved in this deal, that they balked and bounced out. It seemed to be okay for a short time. Some believed and some didn't. It's a bit tenuous, but I wanted to throw it out there for your consideration. It's kind of interesting that this other mysterious kinsman redeemer, why is he even thrown in there? I mean, was there an actual kinsman redeemer, another one that was closer in ties? Very possibly, but it was just odd that there was, out of nowhere, there's some other redeemer. Oh yeah, I'll do it, but there's another guy who's closer than me. Jimmy?
Metaphysically, don't you see it as being a type of the law?
How so?
That the law is able to redeem the land, but it's not really able to redeem our spirits.
That's a good point.
If you do everything right by the law, then physically all the stuff will be righteous, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your soul, you're doing it for godly reasons.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. I just came to this part about this other redeemer who is closer than Boaz, and I thought, why is this here? There's got to be some connection.
I think it's the law.
Yeah, that's a good insight. It made me think of these other people who were supposed to be behaving righteously and redeeming the souls of the people of Israel during the days of Yeshua, and they were not doing their job. And somehow about this Gentile getting involved, and then they decide, oh, I'm not really interested. I don't know. I agree that that's a tenuous proposition at best, but think about it, because I think there's something there. I'm just not exactly sure what it is. Now, this sale of property, as Jimmy was referencing a moment ago, is all mixed up. In the verb tenses, in the Hebrew text, it's even mixed up. We don't know exactly who's buying the land, who's selling it. Is Naomi selling the land? She can't. It's not in her possession. It can't be in her possession. Women are not allowed to have title to property unless the father did not have any sons. This is not the case here. What's the problem with a woman inheriting the land of Machlon and Kilion? Well, she could marry somebody from any tribe, and then that land gets passed down to her sons, and it's no longer a member of they can't pass it down to the members of the tribe of Judah. The Torah forbids that. That is why a woman is not granted title to the husband's property. It must be passed down through a son.
So it would end with her because she and her husband didn't have any sons.
Yeah, it's over.
That's not right.
No, it's not.
That's why there's a levirate marriage.
That is exactly why there is levirate marriage. That is exactly why there is. Yes, sir.
Okay, so before he left for Moab, he gave someone the deed to his land and left for Moab. So who is in possession of it when they come back? Is Boaz or that other gentleman in possession of it?
Yeah, so here's, no. From what we can tell, we have really no idea who's in possession of the land. But the text, all of the translations that you're going to read make it sound as though Naomi herself is selling the land, which is, according to Torah law and tradition and everything else, impossible. She can't be in possession of the land. It is likely that when Elimelech and his sons and his wife left this place, that they leased the property to somebody else to farm it, and that person is either still in possession of it and has the rights to farm it until the Yovel, the Jubilee year, right? Because then it has to go back. So if they leave, because remember we talked about this early on, you can't sell land in Israel, period. There is no sale of land. We have fee simple ownership of property in America where this property belongs to me. Fee simple, title deed. In Israel, in the land of Israel, all land belongs to who? God. God owns all that land. He has granted his people the right of perpetual, basically tenancy in perpetuity. So when this family moved on, it's likely that they either let it sit fallow and nobody was farming it, it was just sitting there, or they leased it out to some other farmer for so much per year, so that a percentage pay, or perhaps of the crops that could be anticipated to be grown on that property. Jerry?
Well, if they sold it, wouldn't it come back to them on the year of Jubilee?
That is correct. But as far as we know, they were only in Moab for 10 to 12 years. So we don't know when the Yovel cycle...
No, I know, but I mean, that's...
Yeah, absolutely, you're right.
Down the road a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Potentially that could be down the road another 30, 40 years, yeah. I mean, if the Yovel just passed. So we don't know how long they were gone. However, we do know from the Torah law that Naomi cannot sell that land. It's not hers. So it's a little bit confused. It's definitely a little bit confused. Who's selling the property? What I perhaps see myself is that Naomi is not selling the land. She is going to she perhaps had been for a couple of months going to the elders of the city and begging for her rights as a person needing to be redeemed. That she is advocating on her own behalf and going to the city elders and saying, is somebody going to take care of me? My husband and my 2 sons have died. I have come back here. We need a kinsman redeemer to redeem us and this land. And that perhaps that's what is meant by her selling the property. She's advocating for the property to be sold, transferred, as it were, to a kinsman redeemer who will raise up a son for Machlon, the husband of Ruth. I know it's confusing, but that's the best I can do. Jerry?
I guess I don't know the law very well, but when her son died,
Mm-hmm.
does that make Ruth still her daughter-in-law?
Oh, yeah,
Legally?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just a matter of, at this point, they have no males, there's no males in the family to inherit that property. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Darren? No? Did someone raise their hand? Oh, June, sorry. Hold on, June. Hold on, Jeremy. Hold on, Jimmy. June?
Oh, I don't know if I could think about it since I didn't get much sleep last night. I read that about 100 times. The Ruth, wasn't it when they said they left and they came back, that somebody issued the land to go back to the people, and that's why that they started to go, Boaz went for them to get the land back that they had in the beginning?
That's what's taking place here is they're trying to get that land that they had back into the family. But they have to have a male in the family in order to inherit that land.
But that's why they needed 10 witnesses too, though, because it was like...
Because it's a legal
man's
proceeding.
word
Right.
was binding
Yes.
to their property or whatever they were doing, so they had witnesses.
Yep.
They didn't have like contracts like we have and stuff.
Right.
So they had
That is the way of doing it. And them taking off the shoe and handing it to them, that's your signature.
Yeah, your signature.
That's basically your signature.
Unless they threw it at you.
Yeah, unless yeah, that's a different thing. Take off the man's shoe and spit in his face. We'll deal with that later. No, Jimmy?
Yeah, time of Judges was a spiritual low point for Israel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm wondering if they weren't just kind of breaking the laws and people were losing their land that were indigent.
It's very likely. It's very likely. When we see in the period of the Judges that each man is doing what's right in his own eyes, it doesn't seem like it's characterized by people doing right. However, we are being presented with the ancestors of King David are actually presenting us with information suggesting these are some righteous people. They should do what is right. And they do. That's what this story is about, is a propaganda piece that we talked about before for the line of King David saying, these are my ancestors. They lived in Bethlehem. They were righteous. They did what was right. Let me tell you about the story of my grandma and grandpa. So it's quite fascinating. But yeah, the sale of this property is definitely all mixed up. Now, the first Redeemer declines the offer. Now, I'm going to portray a scene to you as it presents itself to my mind and how this makes the most sense to me. Why is he saying, yeah, sign me up, I'll redeem it, but when it comes to I'm going to have to marry this chick and raise up a son for her, and then she's going to... Why is he backing out? What does this mean for him? Why is he backing out? Keith?
Well, first he's like, okay, I'll take this land because it's for Naomi, and I'll be the kinsman. Oh, wait, there's a Moabite woman, and I have to raise up a Moabite son who will inherit everything I have?
Yeah. Why would there be no problem if I'm just redeeming Naomi?
Because Naomi is pretty well past childbearing.
That's right.
And so it's not going to risk any child of his own.
It's not going to risk his money. If he marries Naomi and takes that land in the name of the clan, okay, because there's no more family members, but it will stay in the clan. That is a kinsman redeeming type of situation. However, there's no financial risk for him because Naomi is old. She's past childbearing age. And if he marries her and she doesn't give birth to any children, which is not likely to, then he gets the land. It's a good investment. But when he says, oh, you want me to marry this fertile myrtle from Moab, she's going to spit out, she could potentially spit out all kinds of children. And then I'm not going to get this land. The land is going to become that family. They're going to potentially name him after this man Machlon, and that's going to be theirs. And I'm going to have to marry some other chick, get a second wife, to raise up sons and an inheritance in my own name and my own property. I can't take that financial risk. That's a situation that I can't get involved in.
But this, if he had his own son, and but it would still go Naomi's son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would now traditionally my understanding. Right now, my understanding is that the act of redemption would be complete if he went to Naomi and had sex with her and she had a child, and that child reaches the age of accountability, which in this case might be 12 or 13 years old. He is done with that situation. He has fulfilled his obligations. He doesn't have to. It's not like he's going to divorce her necessarily, but he has fulfilled his obligations. Now, we know that many, many, many people had multiple wives in this case. All he has to do is marry her and have sex with her and get one child who is a male that reaches the age of accountability. That's all that the kinsman redeemer is required to do. So that she now has... What's that?
Even still, that's quite an ordeal.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, it's 13, 14 years down the road. He's got to hope that works out.
So
but
13 or 14 years old, this kid's supposed to be able to support his mother and his grandmother?
He will be able to make legal decisions for the tenant farmers and people who work the fields. Yeah, for this. If he's a landowner. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know how I don't need to remind you probably that in our own country, many of the founders of this country completed college when they were 16, 17 years old. Benjamin Franklin was like the ambassador to France when he was 17. So we are coddling our children for a very long time. Dumbing down is one way to put it. But yes, unfortunately, you can just look back a couple hundred years to America and see that they were sent, once these kids reach the age of 12, 13 years old, send them off to college. They're ready to go. They're learning a trade, and by the time they're 20 or 30, they're fully established in a career.
8-year-old king in Judah.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're kind of dragging that process out because of the Industrial Revolution. We don't want kids to be damaged.
Their own kids to give them their land and their goods, not somebody else's goods. If you had a child by someone else, that would go to them and be their land. It's not yours.
Yeah, and you got to remember too that we don't have Social Security. There's no pension. I mean, unless you had a good amount of money, which most people didn't, where you can afford to set some aside for retirement, we don't have that kind of situation here. Your children are your retirement. And you want to raise up some sons who can work and be responsible to take on the parents. And I'm fully on board with this. You've heard me say this many times. I took care of you for 18 years. You're taking care of me for the last 18 years.
Remember that.
No.
Oh, my.
What's that?
Mother is here.
My mother's here? Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
She's on board. She likes that.
I want one of those electric things that goes up the stairs.
Anyway, I know. So, the kinsman redeemer obviously declines that officer. Now, Boaz makes redemption, and how is this going to work on a practical level? We discussed that a little bit. So it's likely that he will marry Naomi, give her a son. He will, what I think, and this is just my imagination because the Talmud does say some things about how this should work, and I have gleaned some information for this. It's quite fascinating. It's like, I will marry this girl, we'll have a child, and then I will work that land. And the money that is made from that land does not belong to me. It goes into like receivership. It goes into a trust for that young child. And so now, after I recoup my initial investment, it's okay for me to reap back my initial investment. If I had to pay, $10,000 to get to redeem this property, then I get to take from the yields of the crops my $10,000 to pay back my debt. And after that, I don't really, if I'm a righteous person, profits from the sale of goods on this property do not belong to me. They belong to that child, and it is held in receivership, in trust for him. When he reaches an age of accountability, I will have worked that field for 13 years, 14 years perhaps. And all of that money, when he comes of age, is his. The property now belongs to him. All of the money that was raised from that property over the last 13, 14 years belongs to him. It is now his inheritance. He can marry another woman when he gets old enough, and he owns the property and has a decent living coming in. That's what is suggested as the righteousness of the Torah suggests how this should work out. Jimmy?
Just thinking about 30 years into this relationship, when he's a full-grown man, just think about how close those people are going to be.
Yeah.
That clan is going to be tight.
That's right. And that's the purpose of it, yeah.
What a humongous thing to do. It's just, you've got to be in pretty good shape yourself to be able to do that.
You bet you do. Absolutely, yeah.
You wouldn't be in poverty either.
That's right.
Your kids would be well taken care of. Then they work and they take care of their kids, and it goes on and on and on.
That's right. That's right. But what an act of righteousness. I mean, if I was able to, if I was a wealthy person like Boaz seemingly is, then I can take a chunk of my money that I'm holding in reserve, and I can purchase a piece of property and hire some farmers to work it. They have to be paid. They have to get their portion. I have to get paid back mine. But if I have enough money, maybe I'm righteous enough that I say, I don't even want mine back. You can have all of it. After the workers are paid and everybody is fed, any of that money that is made from the sale of those crops goes into receivership for that child. That's what I believe is happening on a practical level with Boaz making the redemption for Ruth. So, interesting to note that when these women talk about the redeemership actually happening, they are transferring that to Oved, not Boaz. They say the child is now the redeemer. Is the child? It's an odd phrase because the child is never a redeemer, but they're transferring the redeemership, if you want to coin a term, to the child and not Boaz at all. It's quite fascinating, and I think it hints to the Messianic line that is going to be fulfilled through the line of Oved and Jesse and David. So that's quite fascinating. And then I mentioned a month ago perhaps, when we were in Ruth previously, that we were about the different levels of the text, the Pardes, with the Peshat and Remez and Sod. Here's one of those sections, okay? You know that in Genesis 2:4, the creation has happened, and he's said in the sixth day he created man, and then right at the beginning of chapter 2, he says, starts over and says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth in the day in which they were created. He formed man out of the dust, and he blew into his breath, And it says, these are the generations of the heaven and the earth. And you can see this is the Hebrew text for that section of Scripture. And what you'll notice is this word right here. Can anyone actually read that word? Toldot. That is correct. Thank you, Hebrew readers. So that is the word toldot. It is often rendered as generations. Now note, it's Tav, Yud, Lamed, Dalet, Vav, that's a Vav, Tav again. Now, this is what it says. These are the generations of the heaven and the earth when God created them. Now, we have, I think, of interesting prophecy of restoration here. When it goes to Genesis chapter 5 and it says, this is the book of the generations of Adam, it changes. Because suddenly, here's the text here, and here again is the word toldot. There's something missing. There's a vav missing. Thank you, Evan. Yes, in one of the sections right here, there's a vav missing. In the original, in Genesis 2:4, there's two vavs. That word toldot is never again in the Torah spelled with two vavs, except in the book of Ruth, when it tells you these are the generations of Perez. This is quite fascinating.
We hope it wasn't a typo.
It's not a typo. It's not a typo. Now, in Ruth chapter 4, verse 18, it says, these are the generations of Perez. And here we have toldot again, and it is spelled with two vavs. That's one of those sod issues that you dig into the Hebrew text and you see, wait a minute. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and these are the generations. It was perfect. God created it perfect, and there's two vavs in the generations of humankind. But then when Adam sins and falls, one of the vavs is dropped out of toldot. And the whole way through the Torah, it is never again spelled with two vavs, except here in the book of Ruth, when you get to the generations of Perez. And I will just show you one thing. Why has it been restored? Rabbi Berechiah said in the name of Rabbi Samuel, the son of Nachman, though these things were created in their fullness, yet when Adam sinned they were spoiled, and they will not again return to their perfection until the son of Perez, that is the Messiah, comes. For in the verse, these are the toldot of Perez, toldot is spelled fully with a vav. Angela.
Can I?
Come closer. Come closer. I know it's interesting because Jimmy... Angela, come closer. Come, Angela.
Sorry.
So Jimmy was talking about toldot last week, and I know Angela is waving frantically in the back of the room about toldot.
I was making notes because
that stuff you were saying was just too good. I don't know if this will make any sense.
Tell us.
Okay, you were talking about the first potential redeemer, and I thought it was weird, and we were talking about this last week, that there's one redeemer and then there's another, and we're like, if this is a picture of something, where are we getting a first redeemer and a second redeemer? We know who the second redeemer is, right?
Yes.
What's his first redeemer issue? And anyway, while you were talking about that, the first potential redeemer. Follow me here and use your spiritual.
Put on your spiritual goggles.
Spiritual goggles. Okay. The first potential redeemer was willing to redeem. Okay, wait. First. Okay, what is man made of?
Dirt.
Dirt. Earth. Okay. The Adamah, right? Kids. Adama.
Yes.
The ground.
Adama.
Earth.
Red
Okay.
earth.
Okay. So remember that our flesh is earth. Try to think of your flesh as the land that you're inhabiting right now. Okay. So your first redeemer was willing to redeem the land, but he was not willing to involve a Gentile woman of childbearing age that might have descendants and result in a transfer of his wealth or inheritance outside of the clan. Got that? Okay. The second redeemer comes along. He is not only willing to redeem the land, but he is willing to take that Gentile as a bride, have descendants with her, and the inheritance is passed on to those descendants. The wealth, you said the wealth doesn't belong to him, it's passed on. Right? Okay. So, with our first and second redeemer, think of Israel. Okay, they're given the Torah. Their job is to be a light to the Gentiles. Did they do that? Did they kind of keep it to themselves?
Yeah.
Is this kind of epitomized in their attitude towards what Yeshua came to do?
Branch out.
Okay, especially in Acts. Take it to the Gentiles. Oh no. Okay, that was a big issue to take that. Okay, so it was a big issue to take it to that Gentile woman who might have descendants. Okay, so Yeshua is the second redeemer who takes the Gentile as a bride, not only redeems the land, but also passes on, has descendants over the last 2,000 years, and passes on that wealth or treasure to those descendants. So then you get to this toldo issue. Do you remember what the Vav is, that letter?
Tent peg?
It's a tent peg, but it's also a man. Okay?
A nail, yeah.
In the first toldo, there were two men, a first and second redeemer. And then we were missing the second redeemer. Where does the second redeemer pop back up?
Correct.
The line
Ruth.
of David and Ruth.
Ruth. The second redeemer, the one who does the whole package, redeems the flesh and brings the Gentiles into the plan and the treasure. or
So
whatever.
you would see the first Redeemer as Israel and the second Redeemer as the Messiah.
You know what?
I think that's a good.
I'm just
call.
spitballing here,
I'm
really,
fully
but
on board with that idea. That's a good
it's
idea.
just an idea.
Evan, do you agree? Evan agrees. It must be gospel. Thank you, Angela. That's a good keen insight. So that's all I have for you, folks. That's pretty much wraps it up. We know that the kinsman redeemer Yeshua comes through this line, and Tracy's going to tell us all about it.
No, I was just going to
No,
ask.
she's not. I'm kidding.
I just wanted to clarify that Toldo with the two Vobs the only place it is in Ruth, or was it somewhere in the beginning and no, not again in
Yeah,
Ruth?
right. It appears in Genesis 2:4,
2:4,
disappears
two
until the Book
Okay,
of Ruth.
okay.
Yep.
Which is before the fall.
Yeah, it's before the fall.
Before the fall.
Right. It
We're
appears.
looking for the second Adam, the second man, the second redeemer.
That's right.
There you go.
There you go. That is correct. That's the ticket. He is the last Adam. That's right. So there you go, folks. That is the end of the Book of Ruth. It was a good study. It only took like 8 weeks, but it was a good study. I enjoyed that.